Welcome in, everybody, to the Flagship Podcast. I am Chip Brown of Horns247.com, joined as always by the managing editor of Horns247, Taylor Estes. And Taylor, it is Monday, the beginning of spring football for the Texas Longhorns. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm ready to, start covering another spring football for Texas. And today we're going to do a kind of position battles to watch for Texas in spring football, the top 5 that we think Texas fans should be paying attention to in spring practice. But Chip, before we get into that, there was some news that you broke last week of Special Assistant Gary Patterson saying that he's going to be stepping away from Texas football. You got an exclusive interview with Gary. So before we get into our position battles to watch, I think we should start there.
Yeah, it's I think a lot of Texas fans were like, "Oh no," and understandably so. I mean, I think Gary Patterson, with his unbelievable defensive expertise, having run the defense for 21 years as the head coach at TCU, some of the best defenses in the Big 12, won the Big 12 title in 2014, had an undefeated season and Rose Bowl championship in 2010 at TCU. And so when Texas got him as a special assistant, I think there was like excitement, especially coming off the year the defense had in 2021. And sure enough, the defense improved dramatically in 2022. And Gary Patterson helped with things like, the install of the quarters match, defense in the secondary. He was the one scouting opponents and giving his notes to the Texas coaching staff on Sundays before the game week preparation for the upcoming opponent. And he did it the way that he used to do it as a head coach. In fact, he told me there were times he was putting in 105 hours a week, and that's the kind of time he put in as a head coach. I think he realized after a year of this, his wife was not coming down to Austin because the house they rented didn't have a yard for their dogs, or a fenced in yard for their dogs. I think he just, he lost the TCU job and he needed a place to land. And he kind of, Chris Del Conte set up the meeting between Steve Sarkisian and Gary Patterson, and it was a good fit. I think Gary needed a place to go. And now that he's had some time to catch his breath, I think he wants to spend some time with his wife, Kelsey, who went to Texas, and their kids and their grandkids. He wants to take Kelsey on a nice vacation. But he did say, Taylor, that if he finds himself in August getting the itch, or he said, if I'm bored, maybe maybe Sark would have me back. So he said it twice. So I'm not sure that it's that remote of a possibility that maybe Gary Patterson returns in August, closer to the season. Maybe this is his way of putting a governor on himself from working too hard in the quote unquote off season. But it's a loss, and Steve Sarkisian will finally get to talk to him later today. But it is, that's a hole to fill. And to Pete Kwiatkowski's credit and to Gary Patterson's credit, Gary said he has so much respect for Pete Kwiatkowski and Jeff Choate, the co-defensive coordinator. He felt like they were, strong enough in their, own skin, their personalities, to bring Gary Patterson in and use him as a resource. And Pete Kwiatkowski said that at the Alamo Bowl. He said, I'm not dumb. I mean, this guy knows the league. He knows defense. I'm going to use him as a resource. And they got along great. And there was a lot of mutual respect. And Gary Patterson said, I learned a lot from Steve Sarkisian, learned how to communicate with people, how he sets aside time to talk to his players' parents, to keep them informed on what's going on, and maybe consult them to get some help. And also setting aside time to talk to recruits so that it doesn't just, go all over the place. Steve Sarkisian using, setting up appointments basically with recruits to keep it from, becoming all consuming and overbearing. So, and there was a lot more. I mean, Gary Patterson said, I learned as much as I contributed. And he said he wanted to learn from guys who'd been at Alabama and Washington and how they recruit, how they handle practice, how they handle NIL. And so he feels like he did that, and he wants to try to maybe help college football on a bigger scale. We'll see. Obviously, college football going through a lot of transition with realignment, with the expanded football playoff coming up. So we'll see. But yeah, it's a loss, and so now we'll see what how everything moves on from here. And we still don't have the offensive special assistant from Steve Sarkisian that's been posted for quite a while now.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting when in your article, when he said that he really vibed with Kwiatkowski as a coach who built his reputation on doing more with less. And he said, I think PK and I have that in common. That shows a lot of the respect that he does have for Pete Kwiatkowski, and also for a lot of the fans who I think, were ready to get rid of PK after the first season at Texas and the defensive staff and just like redo the whole thing. Gary Patterson is arguably one of the better defensive minds in college football. He did a lot at TCU with nowhere near the amount of talent that places like Texas or Alabama or Texas A&M even have done, because it's harder to recruit there. And so if you have questions about Pete Kwiatkowski, I think that's a very good quote there, that one of the best defensive minds in college football recognizes that PK has done kind of the same thing that he has done. Now PK is at a position where they have more resources. They have a very fertile recruiting ground in the state of Texas. They're doing a really good job at recruiting defensive players in the state of Texas. So as big of a loss as this is, when I read that article, that's what really stood out to me, was kind of like, okay, any fans that are questioning if PK can handle this, Gary Patterson basically just put his stamp of approval on him.
Yeah. Yeah. And TCU has 9 players at the combine, and they were all recruited. 90% of them were recruited by Gary Patterson. So
Right.
a lot of the success that TCU had this past season was with the roster recruited by Gary Patterson. So the guy knows what he's doing, and we'll see. We'll see what the future holds for Gary Patterson, and if there could be a possible return to Austin.
Yeah, I think it's hard for coaches to turn it off, right? That it's their life for so many years. And they put so much time. I mean, he's a special assistant, saying that he worked over 100 hours a week as a special assistant because he couldn't turn off that head coaching mode. Maybe, his wife definitely deserves a nice vacation. I would agree with that. I think that's something coaches, people see what college coaches make and are like, oh, they're like set. And it's like, well, their wives are pretty much single moms if they have kids a lot of times because they don't have a lot of time for family. So I'm glad he's going to take some time and take his wife on vacation. But it wouldn't be surprising. Yeah. Like if he gets that itch, if you see him back again, I think too.
Yeah, and he mentioned an interesting story about R.C. Slocum, who battled Hodgkin's lymphoma successfully, thank goodness. But he compared life to a roll of 100 pennies. And he was talking to Gary, and he said, how old are you? And Gary's like, oh, I'm 63. And he said, okay, so if we're lucky, we get 80 good years. And he said, you got 17, he put 17 pennies aside and said, here's what, hopefully you have left, and spend those wisely.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that also hit home with Gary that, how many attaboys do you need? What are you looking for? And so, you're right. It's hard for coaches to turn it off. It is. And when it's what they've done their whole lives. And he also was very, very much about the players.
Mhm.
And he kept stressing that. He said he really was impressed with the character of the Texas roster, that he bonded with several players, especially Jahdae Barron, who, Gary's an old secondary coach. So he loves the playmakers in the secondary, and Jahdae Barron leading the team in tackles for loss. He had 3 tackles for loss against TCU. I think that's when we saw Gary on the television screen waving Jahdae Barron up to, sniff out a bubble screen. But he likes the roster, and he said they have a chance to be successful in 2023. So and that leads us to spring football.
Mhm.
Taylor, and I think before we get into the position battles, obviously, one position we're not going to talk about as a position battle is quarterback. And that's because Quinn Ewers is the guy
Right.
until further notice. And if there is further notice, it either means that Malik Murphy or Arch Manning has, taken some massive stride, or that Quinn Ewers has taken a step back. Now, that's not what we're hearing. What I've heard through the winter conditioning is that Quinn Ewers has been really sharp and has put in a lot of extra work. We know about the haircut. Lot of people reading into that as a sign of maturity. We had his high school coach on, Riley Dodge from South Lake Carroll, who said he wanted Quinn to cut that hair all the while that he was at South Lake Carroll. No luck. And so mullets sprouted up all over South Lake, but the mullet's gone, and the focus appears to be really sharp. And he's got a new group of receivers, thanks to A.D. Mitchell coming in, John Tate Cook, the early enrollee freshman, DeAndre Moore, early enrollee freshman, and the return of Isaiah Nayer. Now, Nayer is still recovering from the ACL surgery repair from last fall camp, but there's a lot of excitement, and Quinn Ewers is the guy.
Yeah, he is, and I think it's funny. I've seen a number of like national headlines about quarterback battle in Austin this spring, and it's like, is there? I mean, I know that gets clicks, but I think the reality of the situation is what you said. Quinn Ewers is the guy basically until he's not, and if and there's as you've reported, as we've heard from our sources, there's no reason to think that he has taken any steps back. If anything, he's really, I feel like that year, his first year, going through some of the ups and downs, the adversity, even maybe even that injury and coming back from it and thinking, he had everything figured out, and then kind of hit a little slump there in the midseason in October, after that Oklahoma game. I think, based off everything that we know about Quinn Ewers, there is no reason for me to think that he's just going to, think he can skate on through and glide on by and still keep the job. I think he's hungry, and I think that's a good thing. And if, he does, well, it'll be interesting to see what Malik Murphy really is, because we haven't really had the opportunity to see it. But, with him being QB2 this spring, if he's making strides, I'm going to be very intrigued to see how Quinn Ewers kind of accepts it, embraces the competition. Because I think with the type of personality he has, I think it's only going to make him better. And I think he's going to know that if he feels it's close, he's got to step it up even more. And really, there's no reason to think that he wouldn't, kind of answer that call.
Yeah, and high praise for Malik Murphy too. He's healthy, he's confident, he's ready, he wants to compete, and Texas needs that. They need him to push Quinn Ewers. Arch Manning, we know, is well, we reported in the Insider that he's every bit as detailed as you would expect a Manning to be, and has come in and already is treating the position like a pro. So the quarterback room looks good for Texas as we start off spring football for the 2023 season. And then it's it's about how some of these other positions come together, and especially on offense, the biggest question mark, because you have 10 of 11 starters back, is at running back. And, Bijan Robinson has been up at the NFL Combine and, getting glowing praise. Same with Roshan Johnson. And it's going to be interesting this spring because Jonathan Brooks, as you reported, had hernia surgery after the Alamo Bowl and is going to be limited. And, we don't know what his involvement this spring will be. That's part of the reason that Savion Red moved from receiver to running back. But you've got early enrollee freshman CJ Baxter, you've got Keelan Robinson, you've got Jaden Blue, who we still haven't really gotten a great look at. We thought we were going to see him in the Alamo Bowl, and then we didn't. And so, this is we're going to learn stuff this spring at this position because with Jonathan Brooks limited and us not having really seen CJ Baxter, Savion Red, or Jaden Blue, this is a real opportunity because we know that Steve Sarkisian will play 2 and 3 running backs.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look at the tape of the last 2 seasons. I mean, it wasn't just because of Bijan Robinson and Roshan Johnson. It wasn't just last year even. They've done that. Sark did a really good job, I think, at rotating the running backs in, and that's a difficult thing because it's not like a receiver where there's multiple that can be on the field that may have the chance to get the ball. There's one ball and there's usually one running back there, and so this is going to be, I think, the number one position, probably the only position battle to really watch on the offensive side of the ball, just with, the offensive line. I think it's, well, I guess with, Cole Hudson recovering from his surgery, but the running back room, I think there's a lot of talent. It's obviously unproven talent at the college level at this point. We don't know, as Chip said, what Jonathan Brooks's availability is. We have not been able to be to a practice. We will be at a practice Monday morning. So that will be something that we can kind of gauge, if what type of involvement he at least has at the start of spring. And when we talk to Sark, we'll get probably more answers there. But this is a prime opportunity for, Jaden Blue, Keelan Robinson, and Cedric Baxter to really just make a case for themselves, especially if Jonathan Brooks is limited. Because I would say, Chip, right now, entering the spring, I would probably think that the depth chart at running back would be Jonathan Brooks and then probably Jaden Blue or Keelan Robinson, then Cedric Baxter. If Jonathan Brooks is limited, then that really opens the door for these guys to maybe, whether it's, turn into RB1 or play the role that Roshan Johnson kind of played last season.
Yeah. And, we know CJ Baxter, especially, was the number 1 running back in the country in the 2023 recruiting class, but how special.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Adrian Peterson came in as a freshman at Oklahoma and ran for 1,900 yards and finished second in the Heisman Trophy voting. That's about as special as it gets. Herschel Walker, crazy freshman year at Georgia. Is he that? Or, is it going to be a more gradual breaking in, kind of like Bijan Robinson under Tom Herman?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, Steve Sarkisian has been around great running backs, Reggie Bush, Lendell White when he was the offensive coordinator at USC, Najee Harris at Alabama. He knows what he's looking at, and he knows how special a player is or needs to be to play significant reps as a freshman, and so that'll be fun to watch too. And by all accounts, CJ Baxter's been deep in his iPad, learning this offense, and is hungry and ready. So this is going to be a lot of fun to watch this spring for sure.
Yeah, because I think one of the things one of the things with young running backs is how much load can they actually carry. I think that's what, I know that Texas fans, hindsight's always 2020, but when Bijan Robinson even had talked about his true freshman season at Texas, he didn't necessarily feel that he was underutilized because he at that point had never really had to carry the ball. I think he said he never carried the ball 20 times in high school ever. I think it usually was around 10 to 15 carries that he would get, and he still had really impressive numbers. But there's a difference between carrying the ball 10 times and getting hit 10 times versus 20 times. And there's a big difference getting hit at high school versus getting hit in college. And so that's something that I think the staff's going to be watching to see what type of stamina, what type of workload Cedric Baxter might be able to handle, especially if he is, in line or equal with some of the other running backs in the room.
Yeah, and he can catch it. We did talk to his high school coach there at Edgewater in Orlando, Cameron Duke, and Coach Duke said that CJ Baxter had as good a hands as anyone on the team, and that he could line up at a receiver spot. His hands were so good. So
That's good to
we
hear,
know,
Bijan. Yeah.
yeah, we know that's a huge part of Steve Sarkisian's equation in the offense. The running back has to be able to catch the football, and they usually catch the ball a lot, usually, 25 to 35 times a season, sometimes more, but we'll see how that plays out. One of the other top players in the 2023 recruiting class, Anthony Hill, early enrollee, sort of leads us into the competition going on at weak side linebacker to replace DeMarvion Overshone. And, David Benda and Maurice Mo Blackwell are probably the leaders to start off the spring with the ones, with Anthony Hill and Lianga Lafau. Taylor, I'm hearing really good things about Lianga Lafau, the other true freshman, and early enrollee freshman from Hawaii, who is just a sponge and just a super smart, high football IQ player. And while both Anthony Hill and Lianga Lafau are probably inside linebackers, they will get a look at weak side linebacker because you have Jalen Ford back at middle linebacker. So this is going to be fun. I mean, there's a lot of guys trying to get reps at that position. How hungry is David Benda? How hungry is Mo Blackwell? My gut is Mo Blackwell is the guy that they're pushing, and they want David Benda to show them that he is more deserving than Mo Blackwell, and then they'll bring along Anthony Hill and Lianga Lafau to see how much progress they can make in the spring.
Yeah. And I mean, David Benda, he's going to be a senior, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that I think it's time for him, it's kind of now or never. I mean, Mo Blackwell, at least on the 2022 roster, as of recording, Texas has not updated their roster, so I'm not sure if this will change, but they still have him even listed as a defensive back. So, David Benda going into a senior season at Texas, he's got to really step it up. But I think I'm really excited to see what Anthony Hill and Lianga Lafau look like too. Those were two really highly, touted. Obviously, Anthony Hill, one of the top prospects in the country in the 2023 recruiting class. Lianga Lafau, his dedication to wanting to be at Texas was something Steve Sarkisian talked about in the early signing period that really blew him away. It's not an easy trip from Hawaii to Texas. I've made that trip before, and it is a brutal, probably 8-hour trip. And but that's how much he wants to be at Texas. So he, I like. It sounded like when Steve Sarkisian talked about him during the early signing period in December, that he was really impressed with the dedication he has. He even in his home community in Hawaii would put on a youth football camp, stuff like that, and that's like a maturity beyond his years. And if that shows up on the field, that could be really huge for this weak side linebacker position.
Yeah. When you stay on the defensive side, another position battle that is going to be highly contested is going to be that field cornerback position. Deshaun Jameson is gone. You had Terrence Brooks step in and play well toward the end of the season. Austin Jordan got time at that field corner position as well. Jalen Gilbo is still coming back from knee surgery and is going to be out to limited in the spring, and he's probably being groomed more at that star nickel position where Jahdae Barron is playing. But the guy to keep an eye on is Gavin Holmes, the transfer from Wake Forest. I'm hearing he's just been lighting it up, that he moves really, really well, that he, can flip his hips and change direction, and he has experience. I mean, he's got, he played 28 games at Wake Forest, 14 starts. He had 9 pass breakups last season. Deshaun Jameson led Texas with 7 pass breakups last year. It gives you a little comparison there. And Gavin Holmes is, he's a man. I mean, he's a junior. And so this is going to be, plus you have Malik Muhammad, the super talented early enrollee freshman, who I also hear is a wow in winter conditioning. So this is what you want. You want to have airplanes on the runway ready for takeoff. And this position is going to be a loaded competition.
Yeah, and I feel like if you're a Texas fan, and probably the Texas staff is probably hoping that Gavin Holmes can become what Ryan Watts was coming in as a transfer last season. Gavin Holmes, I believe, is much more of a seasoned veteran, though, at the college level than what Ryan Watts was. But obviously, Ryan Watts played a huge role for the secondary. And, the thing with cornerbacks, hearing about, their hips and being able to quickly change direction. I mean, that's something a lot of times it's not as easy for true freshmen to do. They really do need more of the training, more of the hands-on coaching, more time in a strength and conditioning program at the college level. So Gavin Holmes, I feel like when they announced his transfer to Texas, I almost feel like, not that it went under the radar, but it may not have gotten the attention it maybe probably deserved, I think, at the time. And so this is a guy, as Chip has said, he's hungry. He knows what he's doing. He's more of a man. He's been at the college level for a number of years now. So I'm very intrigued. I think he's pretty quick too, which is really crucial, especially in the Big 12, going up against some of these receivers in such an offensive, talented type of league. So, and a lot of speed in this league too. So it's going to be really interesting to watch him and see kind of if he does play a similar role to what Ryan Watts was last season coming in.
Yeah, and they showed last year that they're willing to rotate guys.
Yeah.
And so if a Terrence Brooks or if Austin Jordan or Xavier Bryce really steps up and challenges, they'll play both. And this spring will be a great opportunity for those young players, for those second year players like Terrence Brooks, Austin Jordan, Xavier Bryce to show what they've got and know that this will be Ryan Watts. I'm not sure what his COVID situation is. It'll be his senior year coming up, but you need to be loaded at that position because you're going to play with 4 and 5 defensive backs. And we know that this defensive coaching staff will cross train and make sure that not only corners can play both the field and the boundary side of the field, but that they can play the star, that they can play, even safety. And so, I had one source say, keep an eye on Austin Jordan as a possible star nickel, corner, or safety. So there could be some evolution during the spring as to who fits where, and we'll certainly be keeping an eye on that as well. Taylor, as we move up the to the defensive line, the buck end, which is where Ovie Ogofu was lined up last year before he transferred to LSU to be with his old buddy Brian Kelly from their days together at Notre Dame. This is another wild, competition because of the number of players who can play that buck end. And we've talked about Justice Finkley. We've talked about, Jamon Tapp, Jere Bledsoe, Colton Vasek, Ethan Burke. But I've got a name to keep an eye on who might be starting off with the ones as spring gets going, and that's Jet Bush. So we saw Jet Bush on the defensive line. Then we saw him, as an edge rusher. Then we saw him move to linebacker last season. And now they really like Jet Bush at that buck end position. So let's see if the old man, Jet Bush, can stave off the young guns coming for him. But this is going to be a really another crowded position battle.
Yeah, and I think I'm intrigued to see what Justice Finkley and Jamon Tapp bring to the table. I think that the two of them are really talented. I think Justice Finkley has maybe the higher ceiling of the two. I'm not sure. We haven't really seen much of them yet, but what we have seen, I feel like they're really talented. Guys, they could definitely, push Jet Bush if Jet Bush is kind of starting off the spring, in that role since he has more experience. But is Jet Bush still a walk-on, by the way?
That's a good question.
I'm curious
I
about
think
that.
he might be.
Yeah. So, which I mean, that's not a bad thing. I mean, goodness, that shows he's willing to put in the work and do so when he's not even getting the perks of a scholarship. But yeah, I really like Justice Finkley. I think I'm really intrigued to see his development from year one to year two. Jamon Tapp as well. And I'm going to apologize if you see me like rub my nose or something. I'm not getting emotional about spring football. It's just allergies right now, spring allergies. What's new, right, in Austin. So I apologize if I sound sniffly or anything. But yeah, Justice Finkley, Jamon Tapp, Ethan Burke, is another one. I feel like he was coming on more and more from what we had heard at the as the season wore on last year. So a very crowded room, but a lot of potential for sure.
Yeah. Well, we mentioned a former walk-on we mentioned walk-on in Jet Bush, but the boundary safety position, where you have, Michael Taff, the former walk-on, the Arch Manning official visit host, the Arch Whisperer. And he's competing at that boundary safety position. You've got Larry Turner Gooden, BJ Allen. You do not have Derek Williams yet. Oh gosh, I always forget the nickname that they've given. The Raptor.
The Raptor.
Coming out of Louisiana. He'll be here in June. And Jelani McDonald, also another guy with just Gary Patterson mentioned to me that Jelani McDonald's dad played for Gary. And so, there's so much talent at that safety position, but the question is experience and command and vocal leadership, because you're the quarterback of the secondary, one of them, along with the field safety position, which we expect Jaron Thompson will handle. But if Jalen Catalon is healthy and everything we've heard is he is, then it's probably his.
Mm-hmm.
And Michael Taff is also a guy I'm hearing could work at the star nickel position behind Jahdae Barron. So this is less dramatic than some of the other position battles, especially if Jalen Catalon is back to his old self, the former SEC Freshman of the Year at Arkansas. But it's an important position because Anthony Cook was a big time playmaker at that position and a guy who made some big plays at big moments, not
Right.
just, like fourth down stops and forced fumbles late in a game, in a one possession game. And they need that same kind of playmaking production from that position.
Yeah, and Jaron Thompson was a guy that late last season, when we were talking to some of the veteran guys like Moro Ojimo, Keandre Coburn, DeMarvion Overshown, about who could be the leader, the vocal leader on the defense. And a lot of them pointed to Jaron Thompson being a guy that could fill that role. So that's something, Anthony Cook, it's hard to replace that experience. He was never really the most vocal guy. So I would imagine, if Jaron Thompson can continue to be that, and that his voice is heard, it's not just, yelling. It's like you have to earn the ability to become a vocal leader. You don't just say it and it happens, And so it sounds like he was progressing that way, at least at the end of last season. Who steps up alongside of him, maybe won't need to be as vocal of a leader if Jaron Thompson is that guy this year. But I think Jalen Catalon is the one that everybody's trying to watch. And, he is the talent chip where if he has a healthy season, he may be we've talked about this on the flagship, but a one and done type of guy at Texas, because that's how high his ceiling is. And, being a freshman All-American, all SEC player. Excuse me, I don't know if he was freshman All-American, but an all SEC player as a freshman at Arkansas. That's nothing to scoff at all. I mean, look at, everyone talks about how solid the SEC defenses are, and that's a guy that was made a really big impact his first season. Had injuries he's gone through since then, but I think one healthy year could be huge, not just for him, but also for the secondary, when the staff is kind of looking for who's going to be the replacement of Anthony Cook, who had so much game experience.
All right, should we take a quick break and come back and rank our top 3 positions on the team going into spring?
Yep, that sounds great. So stick around. If you're watching on the Horns 24/7 YouTube channel, we will roll on, but we will be right back after a very quick break with our final thoughts in our spring football preview. All right, Chip, top 3.
Top 3 positions for the Texas Longhorns going into the spring. I'm going to start with the defensive line. I think when you talk about the talent that Texas has at the tackle position, which is, I've said this a million times, the second most important position to recruit behind quarterback. It's just hard to find those big guys who can move, who can disrupt not only the running game, but the passing game, the nose tackle, the 3 technique. And Texas has them. They have them. T'Vondre Sweat, I've heard great things about. Byron Murphy, Vernon Broughton, and we're waiting for the breakout year, not just the breakout game, breakout year of Alfred Collins. And then you add in early enrollee freshman Sadir Mitchell, who's going to be expected to follow in the line of Keandre Coburn and T'Vondre Sweat. He's a 330-pound guy. He's on campus. We're going to get to look at him this spring, and that's exciting. And then, when you look at the end positions, you've got Barron Sorrell, but you do have all the players that we mentioned also competing for that buck end position. If they don't win that position, one of them is probably going to end up as the backup to Barron Sorrell at the jack end, and it just adds up to a rock solid position group in my mind, Taylor.
Yeah, and it's interesting to say that too, because that the defensive line lost 2 veteran players in Keandre Coburn and Moro Ojimo to the NFL draft there. And usually when you lose those, that type of experience, and especially 2 of them, on the defensive line, that could make a lot of schools probably have a question mark at that position. But that's not the case, for Texas and the defensive line here with, Vernon Broughton, Aaron Bryant, Zach Swanson, Byron Murphy, T'Vondre Sweat, Jure Bledsoe. we are waiting for Alfred Collins to the light bulb to click for more than just one game. Chris Ross. I mean, there's so much talent and that's before you even really get to the edge positions. We've already talked about them, but those are some of the guys that are in a place to kind of take over for Keandre Coburn, for Moro Ojimo. I think Tavondre Sweat's probably one that you're going to watch probably emerge into the main guy there. But this is a loaded defensive line group, and that's huge. It's so big because games are won and lost in the trenches. The big bodies, the big humans that Steve Sarkisian always talks about, they need it on both sides of the ball, on both lines of scrimmage, and their roster is starting to look that way, that they have the bodies and the capability to make, probably both lines of scrimmage actually a strength for Texas in Steve Sarkisian's third year here.
What would you say is the second strongest position group?
I would say wide receiver. I would say defensive lines like 1A, wide receivers probably 1B, or they could even flip-flop. But I think wide receiver is a position that could have been a big question mark. And it's hard to say it just because, last year it started shaping up this way, and then Isaiah Nayer went down with that injury, and then it became a little bit of a liability for Texas. But I don't see that this year with this group at wide receiver. The addition of A.D. Mitchell from Georgia was really crucial. Isaiah Nayer continuing to progress from that ACL injury. As Chip said earlier, we have not gotten a injury update yet. We will talk to Steve Sarkisian after practice on Monday. But I think the emergence of the receiver room, the talent at that, I think it also is going to take a lot of pressure off Xavier Worthy from being the only kind of deep ball threat that Texas basically had last season, and he's, I think he struggles a little bit. He loses the ball, I think, a little bit when he's in coverage down the field. So I think maybe the emergence of the guys around him will take some of the pressure off, and then he may have the type of season like he did his true freshman year. We'll see. But I think that this is a really talented group. What about you?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you look at we haven't seen Jonte Cook, but everything I'm hearing is the kid's route running is ahead of its years. He's got the speed. We know he's a 10 flat 100 guy, and he's a guy who could make an impact immediately. He's more, he's like a Xavier Worthy, and if Worthy is if this is his last year, then it'll be Jonte Cook's to take over that role, in 24. But could he push in 23? Again, we have to see how special he is. He's the top receiver in the country in the 2023 recruiting class. And then that size on the outside for sure. And the playmaking experience of A.D. Mitchell, having scored, important touchdowns in college football playoff games, the go-ahead winning touchdown against Ohio State in the semifinals this year. He scored a receiving touchdown in all 4 college football playoff games he's played in. He's won 2 national championships. If not for a daughter in the state of Texas, he probably wouldn't be a Longhorn right now. But that's exciting. I mean, this is a talented guy with a huge wingspan, and then Isaiah Nayer, we know as soon as he can get back on the field in full capacity, this guy's super hungry. Was just the talk of fall camp last year. I agree with you. His going down to injury last year really allowed defenses to key on Worthy and limited this offense. And I've said that Steve Sarkisian feels like he's getting closer to having the kind of versatility and multiple threats at receiver to where this offense should run the way he wants it to run. Now, I know a lot of people, felt like, and me included, felt like the offense was what held this team back last year, not producing against a TCU defense that other teams scored on. First and goal from the 2, first and goal from the 5 against TCU. no touches for Bijan Robinson, no points in those situations. So that's, that you can't have that. And if this receiving core is helping to make the offense what Sarkisian needs it, then yeah, I think it is the second strongest position on the team.
Yeah, and DeAndre Moore, I'm curious to see what DeAndre Moore can bring. He was, as a high school prospect out of California, 24/7 Sports National recruiting analyst Greg Biggins covered him extensively. Thought he was a very high major prospect at both receiver and safety. But he was a guy that in his scouting analysis for 24/7, Greg Biggins said that he is excellent in jump ball situations. He's a great route runner, has strong hands, and really good body control at the receiver position. So he's going to be someone I'm also intrigued to watch. I feel like, Jonte Cook obviously being kind of the headliner of the 2023 signees, with him being a 5-star prospect, but DeAndre Moore, top 24/7 prospect. He's a guy that I'm very intrigued to see too.
Yeah, and think about this. I mean, Savion Red was a guy who got on the field, not a whole lot, but got on the field towards the end of last year, and he moved to running back.
Mm-hmm.
That tells you how crowded that receiver room just got. And by the way, I'm hearing Savion Red has A, the body type, and B, the nastiness to play that running back position. So again, that'll be fun to watch. All right, Taylor, third strongest position on the team.
Can't believe that we're going to say this, because I don't think I've ever said this going into a football season covering Texas. It's got to be the offensive line, with the return of everybody, all of the starters on the offensive line. I mean, this offensive line, the young talent that Texas has at the position as a whole, across the board, is so good that a guy like Junior Angelau, who was the leader going into last season, he gets injured, he gets replaced by freshman, and he ends up transferring. That should show you how good this offense, the young talent that Texas has at offensive line is, and how the coaches feel about it. And I think, as you said, the offense last season, I think, had definitely held Texas back, especially in a number of games. Um, and I would say that the offensive line was pretty good, but it was young. And so if that group takes that next step, it's going to help Quinn Ewers. It's going to help the passing game. It's going to help the running game. And I think that this group is actually poised to take that next step. And I can't believe I literally don't think I've ever said the offensive line's a top position group for Texas entering any part of football, like whether it's spring, summer, fall camp, season, whatever it is. I don't think it's ever happened. But Kyle Flood has done a fantastic job of not only, recruiting there, but really developing these guys. And so I think I would say that's number 3, Chip.
Yeah, I mean, Calvin Banks makes it a lot easier to say this
Yeah.
when your left tackle is an all-conference type player as a true freshman, and every coach in the league is saying, well, he's only going to be there 3 years.
Yeah.
That certainly helps. But Hayden Connor, Jake Majors, Cole Hudson, who's out for the spring after having shoulder surgery, but that opens the door for DJ Campbell. And I'm told DJ Campbell's fine. And then, you've got Christian Jones, who should be getting pushed by Cam Williams, and Connor Robertson had wrist surgery. He's going to be back for part of the spring. He's your backup center. He gives you a little more size at the center position. And then, you're bringing in 4 early enrollee freshmen who are massive.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, look at my man Connor Stroh, 6'7", 355. I mean, he and Cam Williams, who's 6'7", 374. It's impressive. And so they're finally getting that position right. Remember, this is the position that Steve Sarkisian brought up to Chris Del Conte when he took the job and said, what is going on with your roster? You have 18 receivers and only 12 offensive linemen. That should be flipped. And last year at this time, they didn't even have 10 scholarship offensive linemen to go
Yeah.
through spring.
They couldn't even do a real spring game because they didn't have two
That's right.
lines.
That's right. They were using walk-ons. So how things have changed in a year.
Yeah.
No doubt about it.
Yeah, for sure. Huge credit to Kyle Flood too, because I mean, when we talked to him at the Alamo Bowl, I had asked him if he had ever been in a position to have two true freshmen starting on the offensive line, and he was like, "I can't think of a time that I had one true freshman start every game of a season on the offensive line." But both Cole Hudson and Kelvin Banks were really good too. It wasn't like they didn't earn their spot; they earned their spot, and another 1 year of experience, another year for guys like Cam Williams to get used to the college game. He was a guy that Kyle Flood talked a lot about at the Alamo Bowl as somebody who's taken or made a lot of progress that fans and the public don't necessarily see because he didn't get a ton of playing time, but he was a guy, he kept bringing that up, that you guys don't see it, but Cam Williams is somebody who's really coming on and has the chance to be really special. And so that's a guy definitely to watch, especially with um, Cole Hudson, being out this spring.
Everything's trending in the right direction for Steve Sarkisian, this coaching staff, this football team. Now the real work begins. Kudos to the Texas men's basketball team for their win over Kansas on Senior Day. An incredible performance from Sir'Jabari Rice, Tyrese Hunter, and that whole team. 17-1 at home this season. The Texas women win the Big 12 regular season championship with a win at Kansas State, despite all their injuries this season. From Rory Harmon at the beginning of the year, Taylor Jones in the middle of the year, Sonia Morris toward the end of the year, Jakalenga Mwenentanda toward the end of the year, but Vic Schaefer, the madman, the mad scientist, gets it done. We'll talk more about that on the Flagship Podcast a little bit later this week as we head off to the Big 12 tournament in Kansas City. But for Taylor Estes, I'm Chip Brown. Thanks so much for listening to our spring football preview here on the Flagship Podcast. Until next time, we'll see you over at horns247.com. Stay safe and keep the faith.